So, picture this. It's medieval Europe. You're a guy with a map, a dream, and absolutely no sense of self-preservation. And you hear a rumor. A rumor about a city in the middle of nowhere. A city where the roofs are made of pure gold, where the streets are paved with silver, where even the kids are dripping in jewelry that would make a rapper jealous. The name of this mythical place? Timbuktu. Just saying it sounds like a magic spell. Timbuktu. For centuries, European explorers lost their minds over this place. They died in the Sahara Desert by the dozens, all chasing a gold-paved paradise that existed only in their imaginations. They called it the Atlantis of the Sahara. And when they finally got there in the 19th century, they found mud huts. Not exactly the El Dorado they were promised. But here's the thing. They were looking at the wrong treasure, because Timbuktu wasn't a city of gold. It was a city of books. Hundreds of thousands of them. And the story of how they got there, and how they almost disappeared forever, is one of the wildest tales you've never heard. So grab your sunscreen and your sense of wonder, because we're going on a journey to the heart of the Sahara. Let's rewind. Way back in the 11th century, a group of Tuareg nomads were roaming around the Sahara, doing their nomad thing, and they found a pretty sweet spot near a bend in the Niger River. Perfect for summer camp. They called it Timbuktu, which translates to the Well of Buktu. Because apparently, Buktu was a woman with a very memorable belly button. That's not a joke. For real. Anyway, these nomads would set up camp, then head south for the winter, leaving their stuff behind under Buktu's watch. And over time, this little watering hole turned into a market, and that market turned into a town, and that town turned into something nobody expected. By the 14th century, Timbuktu had become the intellectual capital of Africa. Yes, you heard that right. Africa. The continent that European textbooks literally called the Dark Continent, had a city where scholars gathered from across the Islamic world to study, debate, and write. The University of Sankore was one of the oldest continuously operating universities in the world. In the 16th century, it had 180 schools and 25,000 students. Let me repeat that. 25,000 students. In a city of maybe 100,000 people. That means 1 out of every 4 people in Timbuktu was a student. Imagine if 1 out of 4 people in your town were walking around with backpacks and stressed about exams. This wasn't just a school. It was a knowledge factory on steroids. And the courses they taught? Astronomy, mathematics,
too much material.
Medicine, law, philosophy,
Why did
poetry,
I take this class?
even sex ed. We'll get to that later. So how did a desert town become the Harvard of the Sahara? Well, it helps when your king is literally the richest person who ever lived. And I mean that. Not metaphorically, not hyperbolically, literally. Mansa Musa. He was the emperor of the Mali Empire in the 1300s. And he was so rich that historians literally cannot calculate his net worth because the numbers don't make sense anymore. Think Jeff Bezos. Think Elon Musk. Now multiply that by 100, and add a camel. In 1324, Mansa Musa decided to go on a pilgrimage to Mecca. Not a low-key trip. He brought 60,000 people. Hundreds of camels. Each camel carrying over 100 pounds of gold. When he passed through Cairo, he gave away so much gold that the economy crashed. The price of gold dropped and didn't recover for over a decade. Imagine showing up to a city and accidentally causing a depression just by being generous. That's Mansa Musa. But here's what most people don't know about him. He didn't just have gold, he had vision. On his way back from Mecca, he brought something far more valuable than gold. Books, thousands of them, and scholars, hundreds of them. He built mosques, schools, and libraries. He paid scholars fat salaries to come to Timbuktu and teach. He created an environment where knowledge wasn't just respected, it was celebrated.
Truly magnificent.
Because Mansa Musa understood something that a lot of rich people today still don't get. Real wealth isn't gold, it's brains. And he filled Timbuktu with the best brains in the world. So what did these scholars actually produce? Oh, just a few 100,000 manuscripts on basically every topic you can imagine. Astronomy. They studied the stars and planets in a way that would make NASA proud. Mathematics.
What did they produce?
They invented algebra. No big deal. Medicine. They had advanced surgical techniques while Europe was still using leeches for everything. Law. They built complex legal systems that actually worked. Philosophy. They argued about the meaning of life, just like college students today, but with better calligraphy. And yes, sex ed. One manuscript is literally titled, Advising Men on Sexual Engagement with Their Women. It's basically an ancient Kama Sutra for the Sahara, with tips on aphrodisiacs and how to deal with infertility. So yeah, they covered everything. And here's the thing. These weren't just copies of European or Arab texts. They were original works, written in Arabic, but also in local languages like Songhay, Tamashek, and Bambara, using a script called Ajami, which is basically Arabic letters adapted for African languages. These scholars weren't just borrowing knowledge, they were creating it. They were proving that Africa had a written history, a recorded culture, and a sophisticated intellectual tradition long before Europeans showed up. A fact that absolutely blew the minds of European explorers when they finally found these manuscripts. Actually, let's be real, they didn't find them. The locals had to force them to look. Okay, so let's talk about those European explorers, because their story is honestly kind of tragicomic. For centuries, Timbuktu was the ultimate white whale for European adventurers. The British, the French, the Portuguese, they all wanted to find it, and they all failed, because the Sahara Desert is basically nature's "you shall not pass." People
the rickety
died,
swamp bridge
dropped
claims
like
its
flies,
first victim,
heat stroke,
with character
thirst,
A out of the running.
bandits,
Who will
bad
dare
maps,
cross next?
bad decisions.
Find out.
It was like a medieval version of survival TV, except the contestants never came back. Finally, in 1828, a French explorer named René Caillié managed to get there and survive. He walked into Timbuktu expecting golden palaces. He saw mud brick buildings. He was so underwhelmed that he immediately left and went home. To his credit, he did write a book about it, describing the place as not much. But what Caillié missed, or didn't care about, was the stuff that mattered. He walked past buildings containing hundreds of thousands of manuscripts. He literally had no idea, because to him, a book written in Arabic or a local African language wasn't real history. It took another century, plus a bunch of scholars who actually looked, to realize that Timbuktu wasn't a disappointment. It was a treasure trove, the biggest manuscript collection in Africa, older than many European libraries, and nobody in Europe cared until way too late. But the best part of this story is yet to come, because in 2012, Timbuktu faced its biggest threat yet, Al-Qaeda. Specifically, a group called Ansar Dine, affiliated with Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, rolled into town. They took over. They imposed their brutal version of Islamic law. They destroyed ancient shrines and mosques because they considered them haram, forbidden. And they started burning books. In the courtyard of the Ahmed Baba Institute, they set fire to about 4,000 manuscripts as a warning. It was a message: we will destroy your past. We will erase your memory. But there was one guy who wasn't having it. Abdelkader Haidara. He was the curator of a family library that had been collecting manuscripts for generations. And he knew that if he didn't act fast, 350,000 years of history were about to go up in smoke. So he did what any sane person would do in that situation. He launched a smuggling operation. Haidara called a secret meeting with his fellow librarians. His plan? Evacuate the manuscripts. Not to some safe house in the city. That was too risky. All the way to Bamako, the capital, a 900-kilometer journey through jihadist-controlled territory. But he had a problem. No money. Fortunately, he had been awarded a $12,000 grant from the Ford Foundation to study English at Oxford. Instead of using it to learn English, he asked if he could use it to save the manuscripts. They said yes. 3 days later, the money was in his account. And the heist began. Haidara recruited his nephew, his relatives, his friends, and pretty much anyone who could keep their mouth shut. They bought metal trunks, they bought wooden boxes, they bought empty oil barrels and had a blacksmith hammer them into boxes. Every night by flashlight, because the jihadists had cut the power, they packed the manuscripts into trunks. Then they loaded them onto donkey carts, drove them to safe houses around the city, and waited. The first phase was just getting them out of the main libraries. But that was the easy part. Next, they had to smuggle the manuscripts out of Timbuktu itself, past Al-Qaeda checkpoints, past government soldiers who might mistake them for weapons, past bandits who might think the trunks were full of gold. They used boats on the Niger River, trucks disguised as fruit transports, anything that could carry a box without drawing attention. At one point, Haidara's nephew, Mohammed Touré, was stopped by an Al-Qaeda militant named Umar Ould Hamaha, and I need to pause here, because this is insane. Hamaha shined a flashlight in his face. "You're stealing these books," he said. Touré replied, "No, I'm moving them to a safer place. So Hamaha arrested him, threw him in jail. Touré was charged with theft. Under Sharia, that meant he could lose a hand or a foot. So what did he do? He started quoting the Quran, citing hadiths, arguing that under Islamic law, you need incontrovertible proof to punish someone. He bought himself time. Meanwhile, Haidara called everyone he knew, imams, community leaders, other librarians, to provide affidavits proving Touré was the curator. After 24 hours, they let him go. Close call. And there were more. A boat full of manuscripts was captured by bandits and held for ransom. A French helicopter almost fired missiles at a boat carrying books, thinking it was smuggling guns. But somehow, some way, they pulled it off. Over 9 months, Haidara and his team evacuated nearly 350,000 manuscripts. When the French military arrived in 2013 and drove the jihadists out, only about 4,000 manuscripts had been burned. The rest? Safe in Bamako, waiting to be restored, waiting to be digitized, waiting to return home. Now, you might be thinking, okay, cool story, but why should I care about some old books in a desert? Let me tell you, these manuscripts aren't just books. They're proof. Proof that Africa had a written tradition. Proof that Islamic civilization wasn't just about warriors and conquest. It was about scholars, thinkers, and poets. One of the manuscripts is a 12th century Quran, written on fish skin, decorated with gold, absolutely stunning. Another describes the solution to a conflict between two kingdoms. In what is now Nigeria, written by an intellectual and Sufi warrior who briefly ruled Timbuktu in the 19th century. Haidara calls this guy a jihadist in the original sense, someone who fights an inner battle against evil ideas, desires, and anger, subduing them with reason and obedience to God. His comment? A beautiful lesson for those who spread terror today. And that, right there, is the point. The manuscripts of Timbuktu show us a version of Islam that is tolerant, intellectual, and open to debate. The jihadists who wanted to burn them represented a different version of Islam, one based on fear, ignorance, and violence. The manuscripts challenge that version. They prove it's a false interpretation, a modern aberration, not a return to some pure Islamic past. The past, in fact, was far more interesting and nuanced, and that's why the manuscripts matter, not just for Mali, not just for Africa, for the world. So where are the manuscripts now? Well, about 350,000 of them are still in Bamako, waiting to be properly cataloged. It's a massive job. Many of them were moved in such a hurry that they're all jumbled up. They're in fragile condition. They need restoration. But slowly, carefully, librarians and researchers are working on them, digitizing them, translating them, putting them online, and the collection is starting to come home. In 2025, the first shipment, 200 boxes, 5.5 tons of manuscripts, was returned to Timbuktu. The story of Haidara and his team is now legendary. Joshua Hammer wrote a book about them. It's called The Badass Librarians of Timbuktu. And yes, they are badass. They risked their lives to save history. They used donkey carts and oil barrels to outwit Al-Qaeda. And they won. They saved 350,000 manuscripts, 350,000 voices from the past. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. Why don't we know this story? Why did it take until the 21st century for the world to learn about Timbuktu's intellectual heritage? Well, let's be honest. It's because of racism. European historians, for centuries, insisted that Africa had no written history, that everything was oral, that there were no books, no libraries, no scholars. And they were wrong. Haidara himself said it best. A lot of people were surprised because they had been told, even at school, that there were no written African historical records. But we have hundreds of thousands of these documents in Arabic and in African languages. Manuscripts of Timbuktu prove that Africa had a written history, a deep one, a rich one. And yet, most people have never heard of them. Part of it is that Timbuktu was just too damn hard to get to. The Sahara is a formidable barrier, and European explorers weren't exactly motivated to find books. They were motivated to find gold. But part of it is that the story doesn't fit the dominant narrative. The narrative that says history is what happened in Europe. The narrative that treats non-Western cultures as footnotes. The narrative that tries to erase entire civilizations. The Timbuktu manuscripts push back against all of that. They say, we were here. We had a culture. We had a civilization. We had scholars and poets and philosophers. And we wrote it all down. So what does the future hold for Timbuktu? Well, the city is slowly recovering. The jihadists are gone, but the scars remain. Many families haven't returned. The economy is struggling. But the manuscripts are still there. They are being digitized, translated, and studied. New discoveries are being made all the time. The scientific analysis of inks and paper of the manuscripts is creating new knowledge. The manuscripts tell us about the exchange of knowledge across the Sahara and between different Muslim regions. They prove that Timbuktu was not isolated. It was connected to a vast network of learning stretching from Spain to India, and as more of them become available online, more people will be able to access them, to read them, to understand them. The digital revolution is bringing Timbuktu's past into the present in ways that would have been unimaginable just a generation ago. And it's challenging the old prejudices, proving that the dark continent was never dark. It just needed better lighting. Let me tell you one more story before we wrap up. One of the manuscripts that Haidara saved was a piece of writing by a man named Ahmad Baba. He was a scholar who lived in Timbuktu in the 16th century, but he was captured by Moroccan invaders and taken to Morocco, where he was forced to work as a slave. A Spanish Jesuit priest named Juan de Prado, who met him in Morocco in the 1660s, wrote about him. He described a man of learning, dignity, and intellect, a man who was, in many ways, more civilized than his captors. Ahmad Baba was freed in 1608 and returned to Timbuktu, where he continued writing and teaching until his death in 1627. He published 56 books. One of them was about the legality of slavery. His conclusion? It's illegal to enslave a fellow Muslim. He didn't have the power to end slavery, but he had the courage to write against it. That's the Timbuktu tradition. Scholarship as resistance, knowledge as power, and it continues today. So, after all of this, what have we learned? We've learned that Timbuktu wasn't a city of gold. It was something far more valuable, a city of ideas, a city where scholars debated the nature of the universe, while Europeans were still figuring out how to count past 10 without taking off their shoes. A city that produced books when most of the world was illiterate. A city that connected Africa to the global exchange of knowledge. And a city that almost lost it all to extremists who didn't want the world to know what Timbuktu had achieved. But it survived, thanks to a librarian who refused to let his heritage burn. Thanks to a network of families who hid manuscripts in their homes, buried them in the desert, and risked their lives to protect them. Thanks to a story that refuses to be forgotten. And now, it's up to us. Because the manuscripts of Timbuktu aren't just Mali's heritage, they're humanity's heritage. They prove that civilization doesn't belong to one race or one religion. It belongs to everyone who writes a book, or reads one, or dreams of a world that is better than the one they were born into. They challenge the myth of a dark Africa, and they invite us to ask, what other histories have we ignored? What other libraries are waiting to be discovered? Maybe the next Timbuktu is out there, buried under sand or waiting in a dusty archive. And maybe, just maybe, its time has come. So here's my challenge to you. The next time you hear someone dismiss Africa as a continent without history, you tell them about Timbuktu. You tell them about the 350,000 manuscripts that survived against all odds.
The golden city.
You tell them about Abdelkader Haidara, the librarian who outsmarted Al-Qaeda with nothing but a dream and a lot of metal trunks. And if you're really feeling inspired, you go and read The Badass Librarians of Timbuktu, because it's exactly as awesome as it sounds. Because history is not a straight line from Europe to the rest of the world. It's a tangled web. And sometimes the most important threads are the ones that got left out. Timbuktu is that thread. And now that we know it exists, it's our job to make sure it never gets lost again. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story changed the way you see the world, do me a favor. Like, subscribe, and share. Because the more people know about Timbuktu, the harder it is for anyone to erase it. See you next time on the next historical journey.